I'm so glad you're here. This is the first of a four-part series on the Reformation being offered by Reverend Fritz Bogar. This is Reverend Fritz Bogar. Some of y'all are from, there's some folks from John Knox here, I think, right? We got a few folks from John Knox here. I know there are more that are going to watch online, so these sessions will be videotaped. It'll be made available about Wednesday of the next week. So we're not able to get it live streamed, but we are able to videotape them. We've got a sign-in sheet going around. We'll do this every week. If your name isn't on it, they're alphabetical, added to the end. That will keep you on the email during this series so that you know what's coming up, what topic is next. We're also going to send around a map, and this is a map that Fritz is going to use to teach today. So please give a warm welcome. Now, Fritz is a former pastor of John Knox Presbyterian Church, longtime lecturer at Columbia Theological Seminary. History and fictionado, church history and fictionado.
Church history and politics.
And polity, that's right. And polity. Polity is how we go about the business of governance in the church, I guess, or how we do our life together. Yeah. Well, please welcome Reverend Fritz Bogar. I'm so excited.
I want to thank Meg and Cassie in particular because Meg first recruited me, and we were in a conversation talking about retirement and all the good things about retirement, and I said, well, the one thing I don't miss any of this, the organizing, the events, I miss teaching. I miss sitting with people and learning together. So I am not here this morning to just dispense the information that you need to know. This is about the kind of exchange that we all grow in. And we'll keep, if you have questions, comments, whatever, jump right in. There's nothing that's coming from this music stand is sacred. In fact, it's pretty ordinary. Not too long ago, but for a very brief time, we Presbyterians got the labels right. You remember, we adopted the language that went back further in our roots to as ruling elders. Are there ruling elders here? Yeah. And teaching elders. Are there teaching elders here? See, we're teaching elders because we're supposed to teach. And that's what Luther was about. The 15th century and then the 16th century was a very busy time in the life of Europe. You can probably think of some things that happened in the 15th century that really changed everything. And changed everything at a speed that no one was prepared to deal with at the time. What drove Europe into what we call now early modern Europe, what drove that whole bus was the printing press. The printing press is an amazing thing. And then there were a whole series of inventions about ink and how one presses the paper and how to make paper. And all of these followed because Johannes Wittenburg figured out how to do, he wasn't alone. He just gets the name, he gets the marquee. But he invented movable type. People say that China was place where printing developed. And that may be true, but the printing press combined with Latin letters, how many letters are there? 26. I think 26 letters in our alphabet, and then we can get into capitals and so on. 26. That's much more manageable than Chinese characters. 2,000 or 3,000 characters. So something happened. It's all connected, and it generated literacy. If you're going to be able to print things, then people will be able to read things. If you're going to be able to print things, then people need to read things. Luther was in on the beginning of that. He was one of the instigators. I didn't know that at the time. I don't know if we ever knew. It's kind of like trying to figure out what our effects are in the next generation. We just keep moving ahead, and then somebody looking back says, hey, that was an inflection point. And Luther, for some reason, was it. We'll come back to that in a second. There were all of a sudden there were bestsellers. It was said that one printing press, printing for one day, could print more than handwritten documents. So, at some point in the 1450s, this dramatic move came, and it was just like lightning. Between, let's see, 1518 and 1521, Luther produced 30 documents of varying lengths, some real tracts, just a couple pages, some real treatises, hundreds of pages, 30 documents. And from those 30 documents in those 3 years, there were 300,000 copies. And there were copies that were actually copies, not handwritten, where you had to refer back and forth, but could literally churn those things out. I mean, it's amazing what actually happened. And it wasn't the only thing. What do we call the 1500s off? Pardon me?
The Dark Ages.
We're kind of at the end of the Dark Ages. Sometimes we label the Dark Ages, but usually that's pushed off to the 1300s. The Renaissance, so we have all kinds of, particularly art.
The Enlightenment.
The Enlightenment's at far past this. So the Enlightenment is going to be in the 18th and 19th century. Reformation comes in. It used to be that when people gathered like this in a church, they wanted to talk about the Reformation and take pride in it. And they were we have Reformation Day. When is that? When I was at John Knox, that day was my special day. My grandfather was a graduate of Princeton as an exchange student. He Hungarian Reformed, and during that time when I knew him while he was alive, I had no interest in being a minister. My father was a nuclear chemist, so I had a different, but it kept coming back, and it kept coming back. I made a deal with God. Have you ever tried to do this? I made a deal with God that I would go to seminary for 1 year, and then we could close that book, and God would support me in whatever thing I was into next. And now, 45 years later, I'm still a teaching elder. Things happened, they kept going, and they were, normally we call this time the late 1400s, the middle of the 1500s, the age of discovery.
The age of what?
Discovery. The thing we need to remember is there was no Reformation. There wasn't an organization, send all your donations here. There were only reformations, and they didn't always connect, and they often didn't like each other. And so, Luther was perhaps the most well-known person in Europe of his time. Not least because he had artists who painted pictures of him and his wife, and those in large formats or small formats adorn the rooms, the houses of faithful people. So,
was he wealthy?
Was wealthy. He was not wealthy, and it's kind of interesting to raise that because one of the things he just beat the church over. By church, he called them the Romanists. He wouldn't even call them papists.
Well, why was he having his picture made?
Why was he having his picture taken? Because people wanted to know who he was.
Oh, okay.
And this was a new thing. Sometimes they were small, almost like medallions that people posted on their front door. But yeah.
He was like Britney Spears.
Wow. You have to go far.
He was that.
He was that. So he was the Taylor Swift of the 16th century. There's something to be said for that. Of course, where there are celebrities, there are also despisers. We have to, and there, what we end up doing is enshrining these people in a kind of cage, and we don't let them out. I'm going to get into the story of Luther here just a second, but I want to look at this map. Just like there was no Reformation, but only reformations who interacted with each other. And we're going to do several of those reformations in these classes. Next week, we'll turn to Zurich. Following week, we'll go to Strasbourg. And then we'll end with Geneva, which is really just a new beginning. So, the map, it's, I thank Cassie for blowing this up. It makes it a little more readable. I couldn't find, I've been looking for a while for a good map. This center section, you see that goes up to the North Sea. In the center, there's the North Sea, and then a whole bunch of things, hard to read, and then you come down to Sardinia in Sicily. You see what I'm talking about? The center part of Europe that today we call Germany. Just as there were no Reformation, but only Reformations, there was no Germany. There were only people who spoke German. Sometimes even they couldn't understand each other. Luther constantly mocked Zwingli for his South German dialect that he said was undecipherable. So even within the Holy Roman Empire was, according to tradition, went back to Charlemagne. And there were all kinds of configurations of that. But by the time the 1500s rolled around, there were maybe as many as 200 different duchies and kingdoms, and they were all barely held together by this fiction called the Holy Roman Empire. And so the Holy Roman Empire, again, when you see this central place on the map, it's just filled with all kinds of rulerships that were more of a confederation than actually, it's certainly not a nation. In fact, we've got to remember that the idea of a nation state starts in this period with Spain. Spain was part of the Habsburg Empire, and you might remember the names Ferdinand and Isabella. Right, that goes along with the age of discovery, right? If you're going to discover something, you need somebody to put money into it to discover that. And people did. And they united. The larger part of Spain was united by this marriage between Castile and Aragon. So Spain was moving in the direction of consolidation, and that's a movement of modernism. France the same way. France had managed to consolidate a French identity, as you can see right next to the Holy Roman Empire. Down to the south, and southeast, you can see the ominous words Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire. That was the Muslim incursion that by 1529, Suleiman the Magnificent had pushed right to the gates of Vienna. The barbarians were here, and Vienna withstood a siege, and there were several other attempts, but never, the Ottomans never got beyond that part of it. But one thing they did, you can see in the map, not quite dead center. It is a point of pride for me. There's a little town called Mohacs, right there directly under the U of Hungary. Mohacs. That's where the forces of the King of Hungary were utterly decimated by the Ottomans. You can see. It effectively ended the Hungarian kingdom there as Suleiman led a charge. There are other recognizable names here. Bohemia, yes, separate kingdom. There's Austria. There's if you look at the boot of Israel, if you look at the boot of Italy, it's not Israel. You'll see the whole bottom part of the boot here. It was the Kingdom of Naples. And the Kingdom of Naples happened to be under the sway of Spain. And so, if you look really closely, you can see the Swiss Confederation, Basel. And they really were a confederation. They had independent rule. As I said at the beginning, Luther had no idea how could he have some idea that things were going to change and go in a direction that he had directed and ignited. So I'll start with tossing in my mind back and forth. Why do we why do we have Reformation Day on October 31st, 1517?
95 pieces.
And there's 95 theses, and there's something added on to that, right? It's not just 95 theses, which are, I didn't even make copies for you because they're boring. The actual title of the 95 Theses is The Disputation for Clarifying the Power of Indulgences. Sounds like something you want to jump into? Actually, people did want to jump into it because what it meant was that money from all these German princedoms and kingships and duchies and stuff were flowing across the Alps to Rome. And there were plenty of people that thought that was a bad idea. So Luther had wrestled with the 95. Oh, going back to I remember as a child having a bulletin cover with this man in silhouette with this huge hammer getting ready to pound on the door of the church. You know these pictures? This is Protestant propaganda. I mean, it just is. There's even some question about whether Luther himself actually nailed the 95 Theses to the church door of the castle church in Wittenberg. He may have, but the explanation is that, that's the bulletin board for the academic community. You want to discuss things. This is a disputation. This is what you do. And you put that all together. And Luther posted that, or we know he sent a letter to his ecclesiastical superior, the Archbishop of Mainz, and he sent it on to the Pope, and things got going from there. So Luther penned these 95 Theses, and I shouldn't have said that they are boring. There are some interesting ones, but all they are is 95 sentences. Let me see if I can have to know something about the need for salvation and the need for wealth, the need to have the personal need for salvation and the institutional need for raising funds. Anybody been to Rome? If you've been to Rome, surely you've been to the Vatican City and St. Peter's. Right? Did you have any idea that St. Peter's was at the heart of this controversy that ultimately would lead to the breakdown of the church into churches, mainly irreconcilable? Because that's what happened. Okay, let me back up and take a run at this. When Martin Luther was a young boy, he was educated. He was sent to school because his father. This is the truth that happens from generation to generation, from culture to culture, from family to family. Martin's father was a modestly successful businessman working with the mining industry in their region of Germany. And because he had this money, he wanted his son to have a better shot than he had. And so he funded education because we know education is the way to advancement. Well, we used to know that. So Hans Luther Hans Luther had his son Martin baptized. Where did he get the name from? He was born on the 10th. The 11th of November is the Saint's Day for Saint Martin, who was the patron saint, among other things, of mining. So it was all preordained, you might say. So Martin went through his schooling and did well, although, as we'll see down, he went to the University of Erfurt, and he finished 30th out of 57. So not bad. But apparently, Martin was on his way to school or back. There's some disagreement about this, but as he was going through this field, he got caught in a thunderstorm. And a very violent thunderstorm, lightning crashing around him, and he finally, fearing for his life, threw himself down and cried out to, who would you cry out to? The right answer is God, but the correct answer is St. Anne. Who's St. Anne? She's the grandmother of Jesus, right? Mother of Mary. And so Luther, who would become famous for getting rid of the cult of saints, saying that God can be approached directly, this Luther called out just in desperation, "Save me, St. Anne. And if you do," what? I'll become a monk. How many people have said that? Save me and I'll become a monk. And he was saved and he became a monk. He took up residence in the Augustinian order, which would be significant as we go through. There's a thread running through all of Luther's writings is Augustine, the 5th century saint, theologian. Of course, it wasn't just Luther. When we get to Calvin, we'll see too. Augustine is the key ancient. So Luther got squared away. He's changed his course for life, and let me see. Another significant moment happened before all these 95 theses. Luther really was a bright young man, and he was recognized as bright, particularly by the vicar general of his monastery, and there were actually 20-some monasteries of the Augustinian order in the German countries. And so Staupitz, the vicar general, saw something in Luther. And one of the things, he was promoted, he took on more authority at the monastery and at the connection of monasteries there. And eventually he got sent to Rome for, it's kind of hard to discern exactly what the issue was, but he and another person unnamed were to go to Rome and appeal to the Pope about some intramural issue in the Augustinian monasteries. And we never hear much more about it, except that Martin walked to Rome. I have any idea how long that is? It's something like 900 miles. And there are things like mountains and, and people just walked. I guess they just walked. When Luther went, he was a young man at that point, he was like 20-something or so. And so we don't have any direct reflections on his trip to Rome beyond the fact that he was excited to go to Rome, to see the holy city, so full of sacred sites, and to again, you see how his upbringing as a traditional Romanist, he would later say, what he's interested in doing is touching the holy sense of going to the places where pilgrims go, of offering himself and receiving a blessing for that. There were two gigantic pillars there. Luther doesn't comment on them. We know from other sources that was the beginning of St. Peter's. Now, St. Peter's actually existed from the 4th century. In fact, Constantine built a wooden structure that became St. Peter's. Julius II, I don't expect you to remember these. Julius II was a pope when he decided that the church should have a new and grandiose basilica, a building so fabulous that people would know about the riches of Christ. Well, they know about the riches. That's for sure. Have you been to St. Peter's? What was your impression? Overwhelming. I think overwhelming. My wife and I had a tour of the basilica and went under not really the catacombs, but the underpinnings of the church and all the. We went through this tour, and it was a lovely thing. We came to the end, and the chancel, looking from the place where St. Peter was buried. And then we took the stairs up and left, and then I walked into this. You know, we Presbyterians don't do this. For better or for worse, I had nothing in my experience that could correspond to.
What do we call it, ostentatious?
We could call it ostentatious. And you know, I don't know. Maybe to me it was just so incredible. It was during that time, right at the beginning of the building of St. Peter's, that Luther came to Rome. And it was right at the beginning that this whole indulgence controversy started. And it was right at that time that German money was going to Rome to build this fabulous church. Something that in his later years, Luther would roundly criticize. But as a young...
I have a question.
Yes,
So you talk about the indulgences.
yes.
So did Luther have, obviously you're saying Luther had a problem on how the money's spent. It's going from Germany and these other places to Rome. Did he not also have a problem of what the indulgences were? The actual implication that a person could have salvation by buying it?
That's exactly what Luther said. His focus was on the shock of recognizing that the church had institutionalized money making and the hook that they used as salvation. And as he got more and more involved in that, but I'm glad you brought that up. I think it's important to recognize the Luther's protest with the church was not some abstract theological issue that had just been made clear in his various academic pursuits. This was about the nature of the church. It was about the nature of pastoral care. It was, let me back up here. What's an indulgence? I've been talking like you know what I'm talking about.
I'll take a stab at that.
Okay.
So, an indulgence was, in my childhood, an indulgence was given by the church in exchange for some pious thing that you did. It was time off of your punishment for your sins. So, you were buying forgiveness for your sins.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that boils it down to this very important what happened. First it was Julius. Then there were a few popes in between, but the real mover and shaker, the one who wanted to bring the money-making might to this project on St. Peter's was Leo. It's funny how. So, who's the Pope today? Leo the 14th. Leo the 10th in our Leo, popes could only, popes were the only ones they claimed who could institute a plenary indulgence. That is, that it covered all the bases. It wasn't just you and your little church, or a trip to pray at the reliquary of some long forgotten saint, or anything, a plenary indulgence matter. All or many of your sins, or you could designate that. You could designate indulgences for a beloved relative. You could you could have the indulgence applied to somebody to lessen their time in purgatory. And you see how things start unraveling. Once you raise questions about fundraising, then you run into questions about all the other practices of the church. And it starts to become a messy project. This is from the 95 Theses. These are actually 81 and 82. This unbridled preaching, what Luther's talking about, is they were professional fundraisers. And they went around and they tried to encourage the faithful to give money for the building of St. Peter's, and they would get some benefit from that, and it varied from person to person.
Isn't it interesting now, 500 years later,
Yeah.
we have prosperity preachers doing the exact same thing?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Was he got his fame because he had the fortitude to stand up and say something about it. You know good well everybody else hated it, but he actually did something about it.
Yeah.
And it's all about power and money. And people thought, I'm sure that, well, Luther's toast.
They did, and they had good reason to. I was telling people Luther was not the first reformer. There were many reformers throughout the life, because the church had, we would say, we Presbyterians would say, that the church is reformed and always being reformed, right? Which suggests that there's this constant changingness, this changeableness that is part of the nature of the church. That the church is reformed and always being reformed.
You haven't mentioned the Medicis. They were very wealthy merchants in Rome, and they, I think one of the Leos was a Medici, and that whole succession of popes with money.
Yeah.
That's got to fit in it someplace.
Oh, it does. Good. Don't let me get out of here without reading something here. So let's do it. This unbridled preaching. I keep interrupting myself. The unbridled preaching is secured by those who had great needs for money. Because you not only need money for building spectacular buildings, you also need money for assuring that you're next in line for the next lucrative position. You want to be the Archbishop of Mainz? That'll cost you. It's hard to do money across time and cultures. I read this 900,000 gold pieces to secure the Archbishop's seat. So, The unbridled preaching makes it difficult, even for learned men, to defend the reverence due the Pope from slander or from the truly sharp questions of the laity. The laity are raising all these questions. And, Luther comes out quite, now this is line 81, and he goes on. Namely, why does the Pope not empty purgatory for the sake of the holiest love and the direst need of souls as a matter of the highest justice, given that he redeems countless souls for filthy lucre to build the Basilica of St. Peter as a completely trivial matter? Now, all of a sudden, you've gone from preaching to meddling here. This is to recognize that wow, it still rings a little bit threatening here. Let me find.
So I'm kind of bothered that this sounds like he's attributing these powers to the Pope when the Pope has no such power.
Correct. Yeah, he's not attributing them to the Pope. He's saying neither the Pope nor the saints or anyone. Who has the power to forgive? Only God. Only God. Yeah. So, for
But you said, if I maybe I misunderstood, if the Pope has the power to clear out purgatory, and then he goes on to say, but he's doing it for filthy lucre.
yeah.
That implies that he has that.
Well, Luther's just taking up what the papal office claims.
Okay.
So he's just saying that it's that.
But does it challenge that right?
Oh yes. I'll make copies for next week, and then you all can have.
You could just put it on the website.
That's a good idea. I never think of that because I'm still in the printing revolution. The treasures of indulgences are nets with which they now fish for the wealthy man. So, I was reminded during the last few weeks as I was preparing for this and events to come that Luther is. So I walk into my library and I look at those books arranged, and I confess that I take perhaps illegitimate love of these books that surround me. And I have a whole section of books just on the Reformation. And there's books by and about Calvin, and books by and about all these different figures and events. Luther, I don't know the statistics and I haven't seen them lately, but I have shocked. Part of it is there's nobody who liked to talk about himself more than Luther. And so he had things like the table talk, in which young students were assigned the duty of writing down the conversations of the master. Luther was a genius at this kind of public promotion. And it offended some people, it worried some people, because he sounded an awful lot like some politicians we know now, that if you disagreed with him, you were cast into the outer darkness. Luther was very demanding in that regard. And what we'll see next week is how the Swiss Germans dealt with Luther at the top of the pyramid, but then they thought they had something to offer. In fact, they thought that Luther might be wrong on some things. I thank y'all for coming. The good news is I will be more organized because there's less material. I keep trying to find a way into the Lutherans, and I will also, I'm starting to put together a bibliography. If any of you are interested in further reading, I can fill up your shopping cart with suggestions. Thank you all for coming, and we'll be on to Zwingli. Zwingli.